All right, so I will be talking about, so the four courses that I've been given come under that rubric of habitability and the search for life elsewhere. So I turn this on and advance the slide. And so I've talked about the origin of life, what, when, where, how, and then last talk was on what kind of planets are in the universe. Today I'll be talking about habitable zones, terrestrial habitable zones, circumstellar habitable zones, galactic habitable zones, and universal. Okay, so, boom. So habitability of planets, galaxies, and universes. This is a picture I've shown before. The reason I'm showing it again is because I want to point out that habitability can be, or should be, I think, divided at least into two parts. One is about the emergence, and then the second part is about survival. To make that distinction clear, well, here's a description of it in words. Two parts to habitability: suitable for the origin of life. And what does that mean? Well, maybe you need a planet or moon or a surface or a hydrothermal vent or chemical disequilibrium, redox reactions, autocatalytic cycles. Anyway, these are the vocabulary necessary to try to understand or try to keep up with our current understanding of the origin of life. Suitable to support life is more like a continuous source of free energy, water, starlight, no giant impacts and no nearby supernova. You need time. So those are two aspects of habitability that is often profitable to keep separate. So here's the origin of life, and here's some things that are necessary for the origin of life. And Stanley Miller, about 20 years, this photo was taken about 30 years after he did this experiment in 1953. Interestingly, when this was reported in the New York Times, it said something about the origin of life. He has created life in the laboratory. So that seems to be the case whenever somebody makes a little bit of progress in this field, they have made life in the laboratory. This was in 1953, but Craig Venter, I think when he did this knockout experiment with mycoplasm, he also invented life, artificial life. So every time we make a little bit of a step, the sensational journalists, because they want to sell you newspapers and get you to click on them, they make it a little bit more sensational than it really is. But sophisticated scientists can see through that malarkey. Malarkey, you know that word? Okay.
Can you spell it?
M-A-L-A-R-K-E-Y, malarkey. Okay, so suitable for support, suitability to support life. Has anyone seen one of these things? These are biospheres that are produced by a company, and the whole point is that this is hermetically sealed. There is no you can't open or put something in, and the idea was to see if they could construct a optimally small ecosystem where you have two shrimp in here that are breathing the air, the oxygen. These guys, there's some algae here that are producing the oxygen. Their poop is fertilizer for this, and so it's the minimal ecosystem you can think of, a tiny, tiny Amazonia. And the reason why they're doing that is because if we're going to explore the universe, we're going to have to make ecosystems that are self-sustainable like this. I'm reminded of the toilets on the International Space Station, when the first toilets were about 80% efficient at turning sweat and urine into drinking water. And then they were 90%, and then they could recover 98%. And the reason why it was so important is because it's so expensive to haul fresh water up to the International Space Station. So if you could just recycle the water that you already have there, that would be great. On the other hand, astronauts don't like drinking urine or sweat, but that's what it is. And so anyway, it's important to be able to recycle on the smallest scale possible, and that's what this is. Trying to maintain a spatial minimal habitat. Okay. You can buy them, for example. You can buy them online for $50, $60. The problem is if you put them in too much sunshine, they just get overheated, and they usually die after a year or two. So you have to be careful about how much sunshine you let into it. Obviously, it's not opaque. It's open to sunshine and therefore susceptible to too much or too little. like I said, depends on how much sunshine you give it. If you put it in next to outside and just have pure sunshine, you could kill it probably in a couple of days. If you put it in the dark, it'll also die. So you have to figure out how much sunshine those algae like, basically. Okay, so are there specific places and times on Earth or in our solar system, on planets orbiting other stars, or in our galaxy, or other galaxies, or even in other universes, where we are more likely to find life? That's the question I want to address today. In other words, habitability is kind of multidimensional. We can talk about the habitability of the Earth, where on Earth there's life. We can talk about where in the solar system there's life. We can talk about where in other planetary systems we could find life. We can talk about where in the galaxy is most favorable for life. For example, if you're in this very close to the central black hole there, it's not a good place to be unless you have a lot of angular momentum. And then here we have the multiverse idea, is something that cosmologists have come up with in the last 20 years or so. And the reason we have come up with that idea is because you require quantum mechanics to be combined with general relativity if you want to talk about the first moments of the Big Bang. That's why it's called quantum cosmology. And if you've studied quantum mechanics, you know that it's all about statistics. Statistics means you're never talking about one event, you're talking about an ensemble of events, a distribution. So when we talk about quantum cosmology, we're talking about an ensemble of universes. What I'm trying to say is people who have at least waved their hands and put together quantum mechanics with general relativity have come up with this idea of multiverses. And so it's a plausible thing that the people who know the most about quantum cosmology believe in it. I know that most people who aren't quantum cosmologists find it far-fetched and crazy, and what does that mean, and where are these other universes? But I think it's at least a very interesting idea that you should try to take seriously if you're at all possible. You have a problem, Janet? No. Okay. 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 So here's the Earth. There are terrestrial habitable zones. In other words, regions of the Earth fit for life. For example, the right temperature or amount of water or nutrients. Here's a circumstellar habitable zone where regions of the solar system or other planetary systems fit for life. For example, a wet rocky surface or hydrothermal vents, and it's sometimes called the Goldilocks zone or the circumstellar habitable zone. So you're at the right distance from the star to have enough light, have enough insulation to keep the temperature so you can have liquid water at the surface, just like this. And remember that you are a bag of water and you are on this planet here, and you're in the habitable zone. Okay, so then now no picture, well, I sometimes show this picture of a galaxy and say, this is our galaxy and we're here. But if you're a sophisticated astronomer like you guys, you should know that no object has ever left the galaxy, and so we cannot look back at the galaxy and take a picture like this. So this has to be of another galaxy, and yes, you'd be right. But in any case, I wrote a paper with some colleagues, 15 years ago, about the galactic habitable zone. And I'll talk a little bit about that. In other words, regions of the galaxy that are most likely to have Earth-like planets in them that would have water on their surface. And other aspects too. And then here's the multiverse. Here's a picture of the multiverse. Here's, for example, our universe, and here's a daughter universe. Here's our mother universe. And here's a tiny, tiny piece of that universe is blown up here. And here's the observable universe, is this circle right here. So it's a very, very huge picture, larger than you're used to thinking about. But this is a picture in quantum cosmology. This is an Andre Linde picture about the multiverses. Okay, so galactic habitable zone. In this galactic habitable zone, you need metals, you need a star, you need time, and you need to be not too close to supernova. One of the reasons why it's difficult to be here early on in the first few billion years is because this rate of supernova is so high that you are likely to have one that's very close, and when you have a supernova that's very close, you don't like, that's too much radiation, it can blow your planet, your atmosphere away. So you don't want that to happen. Okay, and then the multiverse, regions of the, now the point here with the habitability of specific universes is that we can imagine that these other universes have other values of the constants. For example, the speed of light, or for example, the laws of physics, or lambda. Lambda is the cosmological constant that's making the expansion of the universe accelerate. And if you have a very, very large value, then the expansion can accelerate so quickly that you cannot form atoms in the universe or not form stars. And if it's, and baryogenesis, do you guys know what baryogenesis is? Some of you are physicists who know what baryogenesis is. Baryogenesis, you heard of this word before. Okay, we got a few. So interestingly, you are made out of matter, not made out of antimatter. And most of our understanding, at least in the standard model of physics, is that there's a symmetry between matter and antimatter. In other words, if you take enough energy and you will produce a matter-antimatter pair. But our universe, the model we have for the origin of the universe is that we were produced, there was antimatter, there was matter, there was in 1 part in a billion extra matter. Those two came together, annihilated, but there was 1 part in a billion left over of matter, and that's what we are, and everything in the universe is made from that 1 part in a billion. The annihilation energy from the other billion led to the microwave background radiation that I did the PhD thesis on. That's the photons that fill the universe. Okay, so now you can imagine that baryogenesis, imagine that the asymmetry between matter and antimatter did not exist at the level that it did in our universe. You can imagine that there was just as many antimatter as matter. Then they would annihilate. Then what would you have? You'd have a universe filled with energy and photons, but no matter. No stars, no protons, no electrons, and therefore no life. As a matter of fact, you would have a universe that would start out at maximum entropy. And maximum entropy is death. You right now are sitting here because the universe started out at a much lower entropy. Every day the entropy of the universe increases. In the future we will have the heat death of the universe, and then there will be no more life left. It's impossible. So life depends on a low entropy state. And inflation. But let me stop talking about that and move on. I did want to point out that in this language that I've used, fit for life, the implication is, oh, you're either fit for life or you're not fit for life. In a habitable zone, you're fit for life. In a non-habitable zone, you're not fit for life. This is, unfortunately, a zero-dimensional view of this concept of habitability, and I recommend increasing the number of brain cells you use to think about habitability to one-dimensional. And that is, you can think of, oh, it's kind of very fit, or it's kind of fit, or it's or it's less fit, or it's not fit. In other words, this black and white zero-dimensional understanding, please turn the dial in your head from 0 dimension to 1 dimension, and things become more complicated, but you're also going to have a better model of the universe. And I'm going to show you that in the context of the Earth. Here's a diagram of what I just said. Here is what you will see again and again and again. A top hat, here's habitable, and here's not habitable, zero-dimensional. And here is a little bit more habitable, a little bit more, kind of. And then, so there you have a variability in the habitability. That's kind of like, oh, it's more habitable, less habitable, kind of not habitable. This, I spend about half my time supervising students trying to go from here to here. So take it, free advice, just get rid of this and turn this on. It's not that hard. Actually, it is hard. Actually, I should take that back. It is hard to do that, but it's worthwhile. In other words, there's no sharp boundaries to what we mean by habitability for any number of reasons. One is that it's always a multi-parameter Anytime you have something to do with life forms, it has to do with multiple parameters. It's never, oh, if I walk over here, I'm dead. If I walk over here, I'm alive. That's very rarely the case. Okay, so boom. So this is a picture of a shoreline. Oops. And here's the water, and here's the rock, and here's the shore. And the reason I'm showing you this is because of this plot here. So this is the cosmic shoreline. It's the name of a paper by Zonley and Catling for 2017. Here is the sand, the rock. These are rocks without atmosphere. Here are the atmospheres, so it's like the water. And right here is the shoreline where you have a beach. And you have a beach with a little bit of water, and you have some rock, and you have some gas. So you have 3 phases coming together. And for about, I'd say 75% of the origin of life community, they believe that you need 3 phases for the origin of life, not 2. But maybe you only need 2. Anyway, these are rocks with atmospheres. And I want to blow up this region here. Here's the Earth, here's Venus, here's Mars. Here's where they have the water, and here's where there's no water, just sand. Here's the moon over here, the Earth is here, and Jupiter's here. So let's blow this up a little bit into this regime here and have a look when you do that. Yeah, that's the blow up. Here again, here's the Earth, here's Venus, here's Mars. This, by the way, this is insolation on the y-axis. That means how much sunshine is coming. And often we talk about the circumstellar habitable zone as being a function of this one parameter. And that's what this yellow bar is. That's the habitable zone if you want to have the right amount of sunshine to keep water at your surface. Now, I was thinking about this and I said, well, I think the habitable zone is not like this, it's more like this. And the reason I said that is because imagine Venus. Venus is too hot, it's above the habitable zone, right? But part of that heat, let's fix Venus. Let's remove half of its mass. If we remove half of its mass, we'll remove maybe more than half of its atmosphere. And then the amount of greenhouse gases there will be reduced. The heat at the surface will be reduced. In other words, we can fix Venus, have the same insolation as Venus, but put it in the habitable zone by doing what? By reducing the mass. This is escape velocity. Escape velocity is gm on r, essentially. G, gravitational constant, m, mass divided by the radius. So I'm going to make the mass smaller. That reduces the escape velocity. And I put it right over here. So I can make Venus habitable by reducing its mass, getting rid of a lot of its atmosphere. And its atmosphere is thin. Maybe we'll make it kind of like Mars's atmosphere. And then it won't have nearly as much of a greenhouse effect. And then it would be habitable. Similarly with Mars. Mars is not quite in the habitable zone, doesn't have enough sunshine. Well, what are we going to do? We're going to give it more mass. Its atmosphere gets much thicker. We give it a Venus-like atmosphere. How are we going to do that? We're going to give it more mass. It'll hold on to a thicker atmosphere, and that pulls it into this regime here, even though it's getting less light. So that's why it's important to think not just of the insolation of where you are and how far you are from the star, but what the mass of your planet is, because the mass of the planet determines the thickness of your atmosphere, how many greenhouse gases there are in the atmosphere, how effective those greenhouse gases will be to warm your planet. And so you can use mass as a parameter when you move it around to change this habitable zone from here to here, just tilting it. Notice I've just added one parameter here. Any questions?
Why are you using escape velocity instead of pure mass?
Pure mass? Because you know David Catling and you know Zonley. They are planetary atmosphere people. They love atmospheres, and if they want to try to figure out if a planet has an atmosphere or not, they look to this escape velocity. That's their most important parameter for figuring out whether they will lose, or what kind of atmosphere you'll have, and whether you will lose it easily given the insolation on the y-axis. Okay. Another interesting thing for astronomers is, Look at this, Proxima b. This is Proxima Centauri, the closest star to the sun, and it's an M dwarf. And M dwarfs have this wonderful thing. If you look at the Hayashi track, that's the pre-main sequence track of an M star, you will see that it goes straight down. So its luminosity just sinking. And that's why in 10 million years, this is how much luminosity this particular planet gets. 100 million years later, the luminosity of Proxima is less. And then today, here's where it is. So where a planet shows up on this chart depends, of course, on insolation. And if insolation is a function of age, then you need to have a planet going from here to here. Now, the TRAPPIST is even a smaller star. It's an M8. It's kind of like the smallest mass star you can get. Therefore, it has the most vertical part of the main sequence, Hayashi track, and that's why there's such a big difference between a 10 million year, 100 million year, or a current age, which is probably a few billion years, of TRAPPIST. So if you're going to think about the habitability of the planets around TRAPPIST, you could say, well, I'm going to calculate the habitability based on the luminosity here from the host star. But you would be wrong if you wanted to include the effects of that insolation, that early insolation, on getting rid of the atmosphere around your otherwise nice, habitable, Earth-like planet. And it's as if we talk about the faint early sun paradox, in which 4 billion years ago, the luminosity of the sun was 30% less. This is 4 billion years ago, the luminosity was 100 times less, or 100 times more in the past. Okay, so that's why these are important. Stellar evolution is an important variable if you want to talk about habitability of an Earth-like planet. You can't just plug in the current insolation of the star and expect that to represent the evolutionary history of the planet. And we all know that's important because the composition of an atmosphere can change radically over the course of a billion years, particularly in the early parts. Okay, so finding other Earths and potentially other life forms is a major, increasingly reasonable What? Yes?
Oh yeah, sorry. In this picture, can we also consider add another dimension to consider also the activity of the star?
Sure, you can add 10 other dimensions to this. Go for it.
Okay.
Right. How about the metallicity? How about the rotation rate? What were you saying? The activity, solar activity. Yeah, and what kind of activity? Activity at what frequency? You talking about activity in X-ray, or activity in gamma rays? All kinds of things. For example, what we heard yesterday about the activity. It's a frequency-dependent thing. There are almost an infinite number of parameters you could add to this, and one of the things to make progress in this field is to figure out which ones are the most important ones and which ones are the observables. Okay, so finding, any other questions about that plot? Yes? You want to give him a microphone? Hold a second, 2 seconds.
Okay, according to this picture, it is not so common to find extrasolar planets in the habitable zone. So there are few dots, few small blue dots
Right.
near to the habitable zone.
Yes. You are a member of a tribe called WYSIWYG. WYSIWYG means what you see is what you get. And I'm a member of the anti-WYSIWYG tribe. And that means I always think of the selection effects that have produced what you see. And so now you may know that down here, low escape velocity means low mass. Low mass means hard to detect. So that's why I think in about 10 years this thing will be full. I haven't given much thought to how, but here's Jupiter and Saturn. There'll be lots and lots of planets here, for example. The reason they are up here, can you think of why there are a lot up here? What kind of selection effect? No, here? It's high escape velocity, that means it's high mass, but it's also high insolation. It's high insolation because these are the ones that are close to their stars. Why is that important? Because then they go round and round and round and round, and you can see it 100 times rather than just once. So that's why there's a selection effect for all these. So really, you shouldn't think WYSIWYG here. You have to consider those selection effects, and they're very important, and so don't take that too seriously.
Charles, just a remark, because I know some students will ask this question. This big difference for Proxima and the TROPICS system, they are M dwarfs. This huge difference in insolation, it's pre-main sequence.
Yes.
It's before the star settles into the main sequence. For the sun, this is irrelevant.
Well, it's a little
Almost
bit
irrelevant.
Almost irrelevant.
Almost irrelevant.
In the Hayashi, so these things are going like this in the Hayashi track. The sun kind of goes like this and less and like almost.
Sun does it very, very quickly.
Well, it does it in about 50 or 60 million years. That's not so quickly compared to the formation, how long it takes the Earth to form. The formation time for the Earth is about 50 or 60 million years. So it's kind of like when the sun gets on the zero-age main sequence, the Earth has just essentially kind of completed its accretion.
Some people cite quicker numbers for the pre-main sequence evolution of the sun, like 10, 15 million years. That would be before the moon impact.
This would be before the moon impact.
These numbers are somewhat uncertain.
It's kind of like the sun hits the ZAMs, and then the moon gets produced. And the Earth has been, I don't know, I've talked to about 3 or 4 experts on this, and they throw around numbers like 10 million, 20 million, 30 million. And I've also heard 60 million, but this is about, the Hayashi track of these guys is almost 1 billion years. It almost takes about about half a billion years to 1 billion years for a very low mass TRAPPIST star to go from the birth molecular cloud to the ZAMs, the zero age main sequence. Any other questions on this diagram? Okay, I will move along then. Okay, so finding other Earths and potentially other life forms is a major, increasingly reasonable scientific goal. Our search for habitable planets and inhabited planets is now in high gear. So a few decades ago, there were a set of terrestrial environments known to harbor life. And then in the past 40 years or so, a lot of astrobiologists doing extremophile research have increased this domain where we know life can exist to something a bigger circle. Terrestrial environments known to harbor life. These are extremophiles, very high temperatures, low temperatures, high pH, etc. Also, a few decades ago, extraterrestrial environments known to exist were very few. We only knew of a dozen exoplanets. Now we know thousands and thousands. In fact, as I've said before, every star has some kind of planetary system, so there are billions and billions of habitable of these environments. Now, there's going to be an overlap between these environments and whatever these produce. So this overlap is where we're interested, and so we have lots of hope that there will be occupants of that intersection. Okay, so what do we mean by terrestrial environments known to harbor life? Well, we have very hot, very cold, we have acid, base, high, low, salinities, dry, wet, water activity, radiation doses, pressure, no photons, no oxygen, all kinds of variables, almost any variable, any environmental variable you can think of that can be tested to look for life. Now, I should also point out that I'm going to show you a few slides about why life does not occupy all of the places on Earth where there's water. When I was your age, I heard many, maybe 50 times, life occupies every place on Earth where there's water. And that's just not true, and I'll show you where that is. Okay, terrestrial habitable zone. So here's the surface of the Earth. Here we are over here. And this is a map of deserts. So here's the Sahara Desert. In the Saudi Arabian desert, we have some desert in Australia here. There's a desert down here, the Atacama Desert. There's a little bit of desert in the southwest of the US. Desert is a place where you have not that much water. When there's not that much water, there's not that much life. We can agree on that. And that's the water desert. Then there's something I call the temperature desert. Here's the temperature desert. Here's another temperature desert. Not much life in the polar caps. a lot less life in the polar caps than there is in the Amazon. And that should be obvious. And so this region is more habitable than this region if you go by amount of biomass. So there's a variability to habitability. You wouldn't say this is totally uninhabited because I guess there's some rocks, some photosynthetic bacteria underneath the rocks, and they're getting a little bit of light and they're just hanging on. But there's a lot less life, a lot less biomass there. So that's why I call it a temperature desert. Then, how about in these regions here, in the middle of the Pacific, for example? Those are regions that are nitrate deserts. Why is that? Well, because I guess for some reason they don't have access to nitrate fixing bacteria, and they don't have dust and other, I don't know, magnesium or something. And so you got plenty of water. You're in the middle of the ocean. You have plenty of sunshine. But what you don't have is iron or nitrate and other nutrients. So you have a desert there. That's why there's a lot less life here, here, and here than there is, for example, here or here or here. So there's a thing called the nitrate desert. And then there's something called the iron desert. And these are places where scientists have gone and said, I think iron is the bottleneck to the growth. They take a bunch of iron filings, really fine iron powder. They take a ship into the Antarctic Ocean here, and they spread it out into a big cloud, and then boom, up come lots of I guess they're algal blooms, I guess they're called. So when you do that and you get a burst of life, that means that life form at that location has been bottlenecked, has been constrained by the lack of iron. So that's how you detect an iron desert. Similarly, with any type of nutrient, for example, Janet in her talk talked about that particularly. She said there's a phosphorus desert. Phosphorus desert, she said here. I don't know if there are any other phosphorus deserts. I looked into a little bit of where there are phosphorus deserts on Earth, but a lot of what I found was radial phosphorus deserts. So, in other words, there's not only a superficial dependence on phosphorus, but the phosphorus gradient also depends on how deep you go. So so there's a phosphorus desert there. How about a sulfur desert? Life needs sulfur. I'm sure there are places on the Earth where sulfur is 10, 100, 1,000 times more than life needs, maybe even 1,000 times less than life needs. Then it would be a constrainer. You go there, put sulfur in some type of form or sulfate, spread it out, and then boom, up comes some algae or trees or bushes or something. In any case, that's how you would identify going around there. I don't think many people have done this, but on a global scale, but I can recommend if somebody wants a nice global project is to figure out where all the deserts are in this multi-dimensional desert picture of life on Earth. Notice that this is definitely a one-dimensional picture of habitability, not a yes-no. It is more habitable, less habitable, it depends on which element, etc. Question, yes?
So if I got it correctly, the nitrate deserts are the deepest blue on the oceans.
I don't think, it doesn't have anything to do with the depth. It has to do with the currents and how isolated they are. Because when you have currents, they go around like this.
No, the deepest, I mean the darker.
Yes. The
Okay,
darker, yes.
so is there any particular reason for them to be symmetric?
Symmetric? What do you mean symmetric? You mean north-south?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think because when you have, you've heard of Hadley cells, right? You have the doldrums here at the equator, and then you have prevailing these guys winds, and then prevailing those winds, and that's due to, here you have, you're heating up here, and then it rises, and then it goes like this, and then it falls, and then you have these cells that are going like this vertically, and then that produces, the Coriolis effect produces the prevailing winds at those latitudes. So, what was the question?
No, it's just that question. Why this is symmetric?
Oh, it's symmetric because the Hadley cells are symmetric.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I'm sorry. So basically, the kind of the nitrate comes from the equator and it's spread out, and these regions are not that. How do I say?
Say it in Portuguese. We have a translator here.
recycled. So in these regions, it's not that recycled than in the regions where the currents or the fluids are
Right.
I don't know.
Well, remember, there are currents here that are both two-dimensional but also three-dimensional. And one famous current is an upwelling right here, which produces billions of anchovies seasonally. And so the currents are both upwellings and downwellings, but also around. So some of the currents, I don't know, there's a name for the center of these currents, but anyway, they go around like this, and then here's where you do not get the recycling of this.
Oh, yeah, that's exactly what I was asking. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Now notice that Amazon, look at this jungle here. I did notice that Evelyn showed a plot of something similar, biodiversity, I think she said, and there's so much diversity here, and there was only a little bit of diversity here, but this is more like chlorophyll density, I think, and that looks, this desert looks similar to those deserts. I mean, not these jungles, and these jungles look similar. Tropical rainforests. Anyway, life is not evenly distributed radially. Now, this is something important. So this green thing is meant to be the shell of the biosphere. So the biosphere of the Earth is a thin shell about 10 kilometers thick. If the radius of the Earth were 1 meter, the thickness of the biosphere would be about 1 millimeter. So if this is the center of the Earth and this is the surface of the Earth, the biosphere is that thin, 1 millimeter. So it's very thin. So it's easy to pollute and easy to go wrong and contaminate. And so we live in a very, very thin surface. And even if you go in an airplane, and then the airplane coming here, they traveled now at 11.5 kilometers in between 11 and 12. And 11 and 12 is right about there. You really don't go high. And so it's a very thin place that we live in. It's a bioshell. Keep that in mind. When you're polluting the Earth, or your whole life is spent in this shell, right? Unless you dig a hole that goes deeper than a few kilometers. The deepest mines are in South Africa, right here. And it's about a geothermal gradient of about 20 to 30 degrees per kilometer. So you go down 3 kilometers, it's 60 degrees hotter than at the surface. So that's why they have lots of air conditioning down there. And they have to find lots of diamonds to pay for all the air conditioning. Any case, so the biosphere is kind of like the skin of an apple on the Earth. It's very thin, easy to pollute, easy to overpopulate. Now, how about the vertical profile of life on Earth? So this is the elevation. Here's 0, sea level. Here's 10 kilometers up and 10 kilometers down. And here's what is called a hypsographic curve here. So there's this. So what fraction of the surface is covered by what height? So here's about, I don't know, a few percent of the surface of the Earth is covered by mountains that are about 2 to 3 or 4 or 5 kilometers high. And then there are some trenches. So a few percent of the Earth's surface is covered with trenches that go down 5, 6, 7, 8 kilometers deep. There's the sea floor a lot. Maybe 40% of the surface of the Earth is sea floor here. And then you have this continental slopes. Then here's a place we like to live. And it's about 20% of the surface of the Earth is at sea level like that. And then you can say, okay, well, where does life live? Where does biomass live? And when you do that, you get a distribution of here's where lots of life at the surface, and then there's also lots of life here underneath the sea floor. These are eukaryotes, plants and us, and prokaryotes. A lot of what you find here are prokaryotes. So that's the vertical distribution of life on our planet. And notice that it's kind of like a little bit more habitable, a little bit less habitable. And I want to point, the reason I'm showing you this is because here, why isn't there life further down than 7? Because it gets hot. Like I said, 20 or 30 degrees per kilometer. So I call that the heat desert down here. And up here, why isn't there life up here? Because I call that the density desert. Not enough material. Question?
Having a lot of questions. Sorry. So I was just wondering because the peak in the ocean is like it's not that high compared to the below the red one.
This one here.
It's kind of lower compared to the other one, but don't you think? Yeah, don't you think this is kind of has a bias because we don't really know everything that we have in the ocean?
Yes, but the bias isn't that big because when you integrate the red and you integrate the green, I think you get a little bit more red.
Actually, I'm not comparing the red to the green, but the amount of life that you find deep in the oceans.
Right, so what you're saying is selection effect. We've sampled this is where
Yeah.
we live, but we haven't sampled this very well.
Yeah.
You're right, that's absolutely the case.
Because
And
they might have the same the same peak like again.
well, don't be fooled by this peak because this peak is there because this is very uni-altitudinal. That this is spread out because this is it's not at the same
Oh,
depth.
okay, yeah.
If the ocean floor were very flat, then you would have a peak as high as that one there.
I see.
But you are right that we don't know as much about the life here under the seafloor as we do about the surface, and maybe you can take that as your life work to drill holes in the ocean floor and try to figure out what kind of life forms are there and how deep it goes. Any other questions about this lovely plot? It took a long time to make this plot, by the way. Okay, moving on. Now, habitability, I don't like to use the word habitability because I keep on asking, habitable for who? I'm one of these people who thinks that we do not know what life is. And you can imagine if you don't know what life is, how can you ever talk about habitability? If you're somebody who thinks, oh, we know what life is, then you can talk about habitability with more confidence. I don't have that confidence. All I have is the ability to deconstruct what you think you know if you're one of these confident people. So, habitable for whom? Now, here's a unicellular organism and a multicellular. We're one of these. You know, you have one of these all over your body right now. And so we're comfortable with calling these life forms. But calling an ecosystem a life form, I don't know. Some people don't like it. Calling Gaia, a lot more people don't like calling Gaia a life form. That's too big to be a life form. And then maybe viruses are alive. Janet thinks they aren't. About a quarter of the world's biologists agrees with her, and a quarter disagrees with her, and a quarter agrees with me and thinks, anyway, I've already gone through that. Anyway, viruses, there's prions, there's genes. Are these too small to be life forms? You have a whole bunch of genes inside of you. But I wanted to, it's worse than this. Let me show you why it's worse than this. Because that's the same picture. Well, so James Lovelock and Lynn Margulis are the ones who kind of developed the idea of Gaia. And so they started a controversy, is Gaia alive? Our planet's alive. And then, somebody you may not know, the David Sloan Wilson, there's a giant debate in the biological community about group selection and the unit of selection. What is a life form, and whether the adaptations that we're seeing, have they been selected at the individual level, the sub-individual level, the group level? And so there's something called multi-level selection. And so the debate is, at what level does Darwinian evolution, Darwinian selection occur to produce these adaptations? And many people say, oh, they get selected at all kinds of levels. And if you're interested in this debate, David Sloan Wilson's work on group selection is where you should have a read. And then there is, I mentioned these two guys, Schrödinger and Ilya Prigogine, and they talk about the thermodynamic aspects of life. They want to include life as a subset of a more general, more well-defined, at least for a physicist, group of things called far from equilibrium dissipative systems. And if you don't believe me, just breathe out and you will be producing more entropy than would be the case if you did not exist. The same way that a hurricane produces entropy, convection cells produce entropy, galaxies produce entropy by help. I talked to my astronomical colleagues about this. You know, sometimes you form a bar here. And I say, why is that bar there? According to this idea, it is to help the stars fall in, to help dissipate a little bit of angular momentum so the rest of the mass can fall in. Why does that produce more entropy? Because the most entropy-rich objects in the universe are the central black holes in the cores of these galaxies. So anyway, I could talk about that in detail if you'd like. But anyway, one thing we haven't mentioned so far are viroids. And here's a guy named Thomas Diemer, and he found viroids. These are not viruses. Let me show you, just give you a little introduction to those guys. Oh, and Barbara McClintock, she's the person who's famous Nobel Prize for finding jumping genes. And the reason I mention her is because you can ask yourself, are the genes inside of you life forms that have been selected for? You say, yeah, well, it's kind of like the selfish gene idea. You think you're the thing that's the object of selection. The genes say, you're just my castle, you're protecting my genes. The genes are what are being selected for. This is the idea of, if you haven't read The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins, I recommend you do that. But in any case, she was famous for saying something like, every part of a living organism is alive. So in other words, again, it's the unit of selection. What is being selected for? This particular gene? Or these two genes together because they need each other to do something? Or these 10 genes, which are an operon that have a certain function? Or do I need that operon and this operon and this operon, and so I need to select all of them to survive together? And maybe that's what chromosomes are for. Chromosomes are groups of genes. So you think, oh, chromosome 1 is selected for more than chromosome 2. And so these are obvious groups of genes that have been piled together for some reason. And I'll stop the tirade talking there. But here's this guy, Theodore Diener. And here is a normal T7 DNA of the virus. And it produces this capsid, and here it is hidden inside of this, and it acts like a normal virus. And here, by comparison, is this potato spindle tubal viroid. They do not make capsids. They just float around. And they infect things, and they get reproduced, and he calls them living fossils of the hypothetical RNA world. Interestingly, he thinks these things are really, really good and useful and independent, and they're kind of self-reproducing, he calls them. But if there's something like that inside of a cell and jumping around from chromosome to chromosome, like Barbara McClintock's jumping genes, then it's not quite as alive because it's inside of you. It's more like a parasite gene kind of thing, therefore less alive. But this one's free in the environment, and then it goes in, and it doesn't have to do what viruses do. Anyway, they're all over the place. So far, they've only been found in plants. And I don't know how common they are. As you can see, they're very small. Even compared to viruses, they're small. So we don't know the prevalence of those things there. But you can see that they're only about maybe 200 base pairs long, as opposed to, I don't know, 2,000 or something, or 5,000 for a virus. So viroids, that's a word that should be in your vocabulary if you want to understand this full gamut of sequences and genes and prions and ecology and Gaia and far from equilibrium dissipative systems. Okay, now this is a slide I showed in the last week, and the reason I'm showing it again is because the idea of this Gaia bottleneck paper was to show that that life itself produces its own habitable zone. Like, for example, we're living comfortably in here. What do we have? We have an air conditioner. We have seats here. We've produced an environment. We have a niche construction that allows this place to be more habitable. If we were outside and we would have the sun shining on us. We'd be less comfortable. We've made this place for us to be comfortable. Similarly, it's possible that life, the biosphere, has done that to the surface of the Earth so that actually this idea solves or tries to solve the faint early sun paradox, in the sense that if you have increased we know that the luminosity of the sun has increased by 30% in the last 4 billion years, and yet the temperature, if that were the case 4 billion years ago, the Earth should be just ice. There should be no life, there should be no water, because it would be much cooler. But maybe there was some, I don't know, methanogenic bacteria that said, hey, we need some more greenhouse gases, let's make some greenhouse gases, let's make it warmer, and then that heated up things to make it easier. I'm not sure. These are things that Gaian research is doing. The point is that life is involved in its own habitability. So as trained physicists, you've been trained to ignore life, and so you approach the word habitability as just a physical process. But biologists will tell you that habitability is also determined by the life form itself. And it's adapting not only to other parameters, but it's changing those parameters. It's changing the thermostat too, not just the impacts from the moon and the sun. Okay, follow the water. Follow the water is a mantra that NASA talked about 20 years ago. And follow the water is because water is so important to life. So I decided with a PhD student to look into this. And we said, okay, here's the Earth, and here's liquid water, and here's the parts of the Earth where there's liquid water. And what we found was that life inhabited some of this intersection, but there were parts of it there was no life. So water without life on Earth. So let me be more specific. So what you do is, first of all, you make a phased, so this is a phase diagram. This is depth in the atmosphere, or pressures in pascals or bars. Here's 1 bar, it's the surface of the Earth. And then you make a phase diagram. Here's like the triple point of water. So this is the triple point pressure of water right here. And so here's the region. So here you have ice, here you have water vapor, and here's where you can have water. So if you want to know where water is in a phase diagram, it's where that blue is. It's also a little bit complicated because there's ocean salinity water and we have a maximum liquid range, but anyway, there's the water. Where's the Earth? The Earth is here. The Earth is there. There's the atmosphere, here's the surface, here's the core. The core of the Earth is about 4,000, that's Celsius. And then you have the mantle, and then you have the surface. So that's a superposition of the places on Earth as a function of temperature and pressure, phase diagram, and then you have where water is possible. And then superimposed on that, we put where there is known life. That's in the green. So you can see that here is a whole region where there's lots of Earth. This is beneath the surface by about 1 kilometer or so. There's lots of water here and lots of Earth, but there's no life. We're trying to find deeper and deeper life. That's why there's this question mark. Maybe it'll go down to here, but it won't go much further than that. And so there are regions of Earth where there is water. And we've already mentioned that we don't know how much water there is on Earth. It's not just the oceans at the surface, but there's water that goes down into the mantle. Matter of fact, there may be as many as 10 ocean volumes of water in the rocks as there are on the surface. So the point is that we found, hey, look at this. We found a whole region where there is Earth, there is water, but there's no life.
What temperature?
Well, read it off the plot. There it is. This is 300, this is 200, 100, 0.
So the limit here is temperature. The sharpness you have.
Probably. And these numbers, you have to read the paper where we try to get life forms at all as far away in this way and as we could. Okay, so this is interesting because what we did then was apply this to Mars. They said, based on this phase diagram of liquid water, can we superimpose Mars on this and see if it suggests that there are regions on Mars where there's liquid water? And so that's the next plot here. So this is Mars. Here's the core of Mars, the mantle, and the crust, and then the atmosphere of Mars. And there's the temperature scale, the pressure scale. And again, here's the phase diagram of water in this blue. So now we can go and plot Earth and Earth life on this, and that's the green. Mars becomes this red hashed area here. So this is all of Mars. You can see that there are many areas of Mars that are consistent with having water there. And the surface of the Earth, I think, is here. The surface of Mars is here. So it's much lower pressure at the surface. But you can see that there's life here, and there's extant life on Earth is compatible with living in this part of Mars. So as far as the temperature and pressure and water availability is important for life on Mars, it's surely plausible that it's there. Okay, so that's just, it's good news for people who want to believe that there's life on Mars, I don't know, maybe 10 meters under the surface, or 5 meters, or 2 meters, or how much is this new probe supposed to drill down? 2 meters down? 2 meters, that's not very big, 2 meters. Actually, this is a log plot, so this is kilometers, so this is 10 meters, so drill down about that deep. Okay, So what about water? Here's Europa here, and here's the Earth. We've removed all the water from Earth, and it makes this much water. And if you remove all the water from Europa, it makes more water. So there's lots of liquid water elsewhere in the solar system. And that kind of makes sense because you may have heard people talk about the snow line. Well, the snow line is where interior to that, water has been vaporized and then just blown out of the system. And then exterior to that, you have snow. You have ice. And the ice, what is ice? Well, when you heat it up like it is near the interior to this ice at the surface, you have water. So there's lots of water, but not at the surface, but underneath an ice shell. Why is that? Because it's at a distance from the sun where it doesn't get much light. But remember, objects this big are always hotter in the middle. They're hotter in the middle, they can support liquid water. They don't have to have ice all the way down. That's not true of meteorites. It's not true of the things that you showed because your objects are 2 kilometers, 10 kilometers, 20 kilometers. That's not enough to be large enough to hold on to heat and be hotter in the middle. But I think it might be true that any spherical object you see, which will be anything with a radius greater than about 200 kilometers, will be hotter in the center. Why do I say that? It's because you need the heat in order to let the thing become spherical. Self-gravity makes it a sphere. If you don't have self-gravity and it's not very important, you're not very hot, then you will stay a potato. Okay, so Jupiter's moon Europa could foster life. Well, that's because what you have here, you have an iron and sulfur core, you have mantle silicates, and then you have an ocean in contact with the rock. So then you have probably some type of hydrothermal vents, maybe not as active as the ones that we have in our ocean. You don't have plate tectonics, I don't think, but you will have a lot of heat. It'll be hotter here than here, and so you'll have some kind of convection, some type of hot spots, some type of heat coming from down up and coming from down, going up. And that can produce potentially things like black smokers or white smokers or some kind of smokers. So that's Europa. And then I just wanted to point out that there's an interesting thing about just because you have water doesn't mean you have a rock-water interface. Here's a counterexample. Here's Ganymede, the largest moon in the solar system. You have an iron core, you have a rocky mantle, and then you have ice. So instead of having a rock water, you have rock ice. And maybe that's not that good for black and white smokers. I don't know. Maybe we'll find out soon. There's one complication here, and that apparently this model is too simple. Apparently the latest data says that Ganymede is not that, but more like, well, this is the same. This is a rocky mantle, then ice, and then salt water. But it's more like this. It's called a moonwich. It's like a moon sandwich, where you have layers of ice, and then you have layers of water in between the ice. I'm not sure how accurate that is, but that is one of the latest models for Ganymede's interior. And if that's the case, then you do have a thin layer of water in contact with the rock, and you might have these energetic redox producing chemical disequilibria, black smokers or white smokers. Okay, so here's some pictures of the amount of water, just showing that this is the Earth's water and Europa. And which moon is this? Is that Ganymede? Anybody know? Okay, we don't know. Anyway, there's a lot of water out there, but it's just not at the surface. The surfaces are all ice covered. Okay, then there's Enceladus, and here you have a rocky core. It's not quite as differentiated, apparently. Then you have a global ocean here, and then you have the ice at the surface. So you do have a rock-water interface there, and then you have these things coming out, and NASA wants desperately to sample these things a little bit better to see if there are fish living in this global ocean right here, and then apparently they get stuck here and go poop, and they shoot out, and then they die at the surface because it's so cold. Okay, water in the solar system. Okay, it's hard, maybe even impossible to talk about habitability unless we know what life is. I've already said that. Exoplanets. What does Earth-like mean? So again, I showed this last week, but if you want to know, we're looking for Earth-like planets, we're looking for habitable Earth-like planets. What does that mean? Specifically, that means wet and rocky, but even more specifically, we say maybe between 2 times the mass of the Earth, between half and 2 the mass of the Earth. Why is that? Because you need to be massive enough to have an atmosphere, to hold on to that atmosphere. Why do you need that? It's because you need the water, the pressure above the triple point of water. You need an insulation, maybe about half, that's about Mars, and then you have 2 times this, maybe that's about Venus, and so that's the insolation region, sometimes known as the habitable zone. Maybe you need a large moon to have to start off on life. You maybe need tidal cycling or hydration, dehydration. Maybe you need some continents. You know, it hasn't always been the case that there have been continents on the surface of the Earth. If you talk to your favorite Earth scientists, you will see that continent formation is not really well constrained. Some people think that continents didn't really form in any big way until maybe the last 2 billion years. Other people say 3 billion. The error bars are enormous. The constraints are pretty bad. And so we don't really know what the fraction of the Earth's surface in continents was as a function of 4 billion years. Why is that important? Because life got started 4 billion years ago, and the amount of continents is relevant, particularly if you think that life started at the surface rather than the hydrothermal vents. Maybe cloud cover. Cloud cover I've never heard much about, but it's very important for albedo control, and I don't know what controls that. Do we have any meteorologists here who can tell me why the Earth is covered with about 30% clouds? You know, why isn't that 100%? Why isn't it 1%? Why isn't it 5%? Who knows what determines that? But something determines it, and I've never heard a good physicist tell me what that is. Similarly, I've never heard a good physicist tell me why convection cells are the size they are. The convection cells in the sun I showed you last lecture, and I told you they were the size of the moon. Why aren't they twice the size of the moon? Why aren't they 10 times the size of the moon? And these are things that we don't know. Maybe you need a high mass star with a lot of UV to get life started, and you need maybe you need a few billion years to get life to evolve and become interesting. Anyway, yes? Somebody got a microphone.
What is the role, if any, of magnetic field? Sorry.
No, I'm laughing because somebody asked me that exact question last week, and I don't know, I burst their bubble because they thought it was important, and I said, no, it's not important at all. And the reason I said it's not important at all because, for a bunch of reasons. One is that the magnetic field of the Earth changes. It's not periodic changes, but it changes irregularly. And we know from seafloor spreading and the magnetic striping on the bottoms of the ocean that when it changes. When it changes, there are periods, often long periods, maybe hundreds of years, maybe even thousands of years, in which there is a very weak magnetic field. Now, if life on Earth depended in any major way on these magnetic field, then during those periods where there is very, very weak magnetic field, you would expect some kind of detectable, observable problem with life, maybe a high mutation rate or some extinct species go extinct. There's nothing like that as far as I've seen, but I should admit that not many people have looked at this experiment, done this experiment. Nobody has gone systematically to say, okay, where are the exact places, times in history, when the magnetic field has been at the weakest, and then compare that to the best data we have for the extinctions or mutation rates for species which we know which should be the most susceptible to the kind of cosmic rays that would be able to enter the Earth preferentially if there's a low magnetic field.
But when you say the weakest, is that comparable to absolutely no magnetic field, the absence of magnetic field? Or close to zero, the closest possible to zero.
Are you asking a one-dimensional question or zero? What you're doing is
whatever time allows.
It's kind of like you have a bulletproof vest and you're making it thinner and thinner and thinner. And so what you're doing is turning down the magnetic field strength, and whatever protective value it has, you're reducing it. So what you want to do is find the places where it is the least and then compare it to, do you see any signal in the life? I know that most people, probably 90% of astrobiologists, think that magnetic field is a big deal. I've been throwing cold water on this idea for my entire life, and I just did that.
I'm sorry, in this kind of studies, do they consider also the how active the sun was in the time where the magnetic field was very weak on Earth?
Interesting, you said, in these kinds of studies. What I just proposed has never been written up or never been done.
Oh, I see.
So there has no study has been done. I would like somebody to do that study, and particularly, you have to look very carefully at when the magnetic field is the lowest, and you have to look at which species are the ones that are most susceptible. Because if you're a whale, you don't care. You can just dive down. If you live 10 meters below the ocean, or even probably 10 centimeters beneath the ocean in the photo zone, you're not going to care about cosmic rays because they don't penetrate very deeply, I imagine. I'm not sure how much. I haven't done this, but I imagine that a meter of water will be fine. Or if you're a rat, you could just hide under a rock. So there are lots and lots of ways to protect yourself from this supposed danger of having a low magnetic field. And so to ignore that, I think, is silly. Life is very adaptable to all kinds of things. And so I haven't seen any evidence, but then again, the study hasn't been done. You have a question there.
And what about metallicity, the stellar metallicity? What's the lower limit? If there is there a high limit for the stellar metallicity for life?
Well, that's
develop
an
life?
interesting question, and I wrote a paper on that, and I bet maybe I could try to skip to that paper. Hello. Keep on going. Here. Okay, so in 2000, 22 years ago, I looked at the age distribution of Earths. So how did this come about? Well, if you're an astronomer, you know that the star formation rate now is less than it was 1 billion years ago. And 1 billion years ago, it was less than it was 1 billion years before that. And 1 billion years before that, it was more. So you go back into the past and the star formation rate goes up and up and up. However, that goes on into about a redshift of 2 or so, maybe 3, and then the star formation rate goes down again. So there is a maximum star formation peak in the history of the universe. And if planets are produced by when stars are formed, then that would be the distribution of Earths in the universe. But there's an important caveat to that. The first stars were very metal poor. They didn't have 1% or 1.4%. They didn't have even 0.1%. They had 0.0000% metals. And with that type of metals, you cannot make a rocky planet. I'm sorry. You might be able to make a Jupiter without much of a core, but you cannot make a rocky planet. So, taking that information into consideration, I plotted the distribution of stars in the universe. This is a linear plot. And here's today. Here's when the sun formed. And so what I did was I chopped off these guys here because they didn't have enough metals. And I said something like, you need at least 1/10 or 1/20 the metallicity of the sun to get a rocky planet. And when you do that, you get this distribution for the Earths in the universe. And here's our Earth. And you can see that about 2/3 of the Earths in the universe are older than our Earth. And people who think that life and civilization and technological intelligence are inevitable, this plot scares the hell out of them. Why? Because the average age of these civilizations elsewhere in the universe are about 2 billion years older than ours. They have had 2 billion years more time to evolve. And and then the question is, to give you a scale, 2 billion years ago, I think everybody in this room was an amoeba, right? You hold your mother's hand, your mother holds your mother's hand, you go back 2 billion years, and you are a single-celled eukaryote. And so you're a new eukaryote, probably. So we don't care, we don't have many moral values that can keep us from killing, amoeba. I said that eukaryotes are great. Yes, I did. Okay. So anyway, this plot, if you are one of those who think that human-like intelligence is a convergent feature of evolution, then this plot should worry you an awful lot. This is the thought processes of Stephen Hawking when he said we should keep our head down. We should not send out signals to reveal to these advanced civilizations that we're here. We should just listen. We should listen for 2 billion years until, actually, no matter how long we wait, they're still going to be 2 billion years more advanced. So that's a long answer to your question. Let me see, did I say anything else about this? Oh yeah, our Earth is 2 billion years, Our Earth is 2 billion years younger than other Earths, or 2 billion years younger than other Earths. So that means the average age is 2 billion years older. If life has emerged on other Earths, it has had about 2 billion years longer to evolve. And the evolution of life on Earth. And this is an amoeba in the process of engulfing a paramecium. So this is what we were like 2 billion years ago. And yes? Can I come back to what?
Yes, this one. The y-axis, it's arbitrary units, and you take one. Sorry, the y-axis is arbitrary units, and you take one for now.
The y-axis, 0. This is Big Bang here.
No, this is the
That's
x.
time.
I'm talking the yes.
Right. So let me show you a plot. Since you're a scientist, I'll show you a plot. Here's the plot from which we really did the analysis. So there's 3 panels. Here's the star formation rate in millions of suns per year per megaparsec cubed. And these are the estimates of the star formation rate of the universe as a function of time. You can see this is a 20-year-old plot because at that time the age of the universe was 13.4 billion years. In the last 10 years it's gotten 400 million years older. So, and then you take the metallicity of the universe. The metallicity of the universe has also been increasing. Why? Because the stars are producing that metallicity. It's kind of like in the universe, stars are making garbage and no one's taking it out, and so it's just accumulating, accumulating, accumulating. That's what metallicity is. So the universe is getting more and more metal rich, and that's what this Fe on H is. And this is the increase, and some of these data points are very old. But anyway, we have some constraints on that. And so what I said was, let's say that the probability of producing an Earth is something here. You have more here, you have less here, 1/10 the solar metallicity. And then you put those two together, and you get, here is the Earth formation rate, it's kind of like the star formation rate, with the front end cut off for the first 1.5 billion years, because you don't have metallicity then, much because of this plot here. And then that leaves you with this here. So this one has has correct numbers on it in the units prescribed right there and there and there. Okay. So what we wrote was, if life is common in the universe as suggested by the rapid appearance of life on Earth, then this age distribution gives us an idea of how we compare to other life that may exist in the universe. Okay, and that's, oh, by the way, this was written up in New Scientist, and they said, terrestrial tot, our home planet may be proved to be wet behind the ears. And then in a less reputable journal, they said, here's why ET won't return our calls, we're far too immature.
Charles, there's 10 minutes to
10 minutes.
to the end of the talk, so if you want to leave some room for questions,
Okay.
perhaps you should talk a few more minutes and then open for
Well,
questions.
you know what? I just skipped to the middle of my talk, almost past the talk, so let me go back to where I was. I have way more slides, and because I talked to you earlier, I didn't have time to finish my preparations.
I'm
But-
sorry.
No, I'm glad to. Anyway, so let me say a few things. Let me go back here a little bit to what I prepared. Let me go back to. Okay, so here in 2004, one of the things I'm known for as an astronomer is this particular paper. It's called the Galactic Habitable Zone and the Age Distribution of Complex Life in the Milky Way. This was in Science in 2004. So basically, you have a galaxy, and it has a metallicity gradient, and we say, oh, you know what, here's where it's most likely to have stars that can produce life. And how did we come across that? So let me just explain this plot. So here's galactocentric distance, how far a star is away from the center of the galaxy. So here's where we are. We're about 7 or 8 kiloparsecs. Here's 5, and the center of the galaxy is over here. Here's the age of the universe. Here's 2 billion years ago, 4 billion years ago, 6 billion years. The sun formed about 4.5 billion years ago. That's why the sun is here, and it is here at this distance from the center of the galaxy. Now, the 4 factors that went into this are stars. Well, you have to have stars to have a planet. Stars are not evenly distributed in a galaxy. They're more here, and then they get here, and then they're here, and anyway, there are fewer stars out here. You need metallicity. Well, metallicity is produced by the first stars. Where were the first stars? The first stars were right here. So that produced metallicity, which gradually spreads out to make these stars, more distant from the center, rich in metals enough to produce Earths. But that takes a while to get going because the stars takes a while for them to produce the metals. But you don't want to be here because there's so many big stars blowing up that you have supernova all over the place, and that's danger. So although these supernova blowing up can spread out nice elements to make Earths, it's dangerous to get too close. So these are the and then time, you need some time. So we said, if you need, 4 billion years to make something complex life, then you need to be away from supernova, you have to have enough metallicity, and you have to have stars. In other words, the more stars you have, the more probability you have for life at that distance from the galaxy center. Then this is the place where you have the it's most likely to have complex life. Here, there's too much supernova. Here, you don't have enough metals. Here, there's too little time. And here, you are too metal rich. That's an interesting thing to be too metal rich, because if you're too metal rich, you make, instead of one Jupiter, you make 2 Jupiters. And when you make 2 Jupiters, they will gravitationally scatter. One can scatter out and the other scatters in. That's one that's scattered in is a hot Jupiter. When a hot Jupiter comes through a system where there's an Earth, you can imagine that that's not so good for the Earth. So that's what's meant here by too metal rich. So when you put those factors together, this is the plot that you come up with. And is there anything else I wanted to say about that? No, I don't think I wanted to say anything else. So why don't I stop there and we can ask for questions.
Thanks, Charles.
Wait, you know what? I didn't say anything about universes. So let me say 1 or 2 minutes about universes. I have a few things here. Come on, go, 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 go. Aliens. Oops, I got a bunch of slides here. It's almost embarrassing how many slides I have here. I did want to say a few words about other universes.
Oh my, that's a lot of slides.
So here, oh boy, come on. Huh. You know what? I think I didn't want to say anything about you. No, actually, what I wanted to say was there's a guy named Brazil is playing Serbia. Oh, there it is. Brazil is playing. You can see I didn't have time to fix it. Brazil is playing Serbia tomorrow. And there's a Serbian astronomer who has thought a lot about what he calls island universes. There's here's one universe, there's another universe. This is Milan Cirkovic. And if you're interested in reading about some thoughts on island universes, read him. There's also Martin Rees, the astronomer royal. He wrote a book called Just 6 Numbers. In other words, he was saying, the habitability of our universe depends on 6 numbers that we can measure in cosmology. What are they? Well, one is lambda. That's the thing that makes the expansion of the universe accelerate. Here is how much overdensities and underdensities there are. These are the hot spots and cold spots in the COBE map, which are the seeds of all the structure that you're enjoying right now. Then there's something called, here's the density of the universe. If the density of the universe were tiny, then we wouldn't have any mass. For example, I mentioned baryogenesis. If there was no baryogenesis, then you wouldn't have, this would be 0. I guess it wouldn't be 0, it would be just radiation. And then there's the dimensionality. Maybe these other universes have different dimensions. Ours is 3. If you had 2 or 4 or 10, that would be a different type of universe. Then the nuclear efficiency, the efficiency essentially with which mass is being turned into energy at the center of stars, presumably somehow, that's very important for, I guess, formation of stars. And then there's the number of protons you need to produce a star. So, is there anything else I wanted to say? No, I don't want to go too far into multiverses because this is not a multiverse-philic, but I can talk to you about it as long as you want to later on. So I'll stop here.
Let's thank Charles.
Yeah.